And welcome back to Punchline. Thank you for staying with us. Revelations that underhand dealings may have influenced the award of lucrative tenders for the supply of COVID-19 materials has caused furor with the medical authority Kemsa on the spot over the matter. Multiple investigation agencies, including several parliamentary committees, are probing this issue as an anxious public seeks answers. Joining me now is Kemsa Board Chair, Ambassador Kembi Gitura. Welcome to Punchline.
Thank you very much.
So I want to start very quickly and briefly with the latest. The suspended Kemsa CEO, Dr. Jonah Manjari, claimed that Kemsa was under intense pressure from CS Mutahi Kagwe and PS Susan Mochache and an unnamed brigadier to handpick suppliers for COVID-19 materials. As the board chair, are you specifically aware of any such influence or duress from the cabinet secretary or indeed the PS?
No, I'm not.
So when you heard these claims, were you surprised?
Yeah, quite actually, because this COVID-19 was declared a pandemic on or about 15th of March this year. We didn't know about COVID-19, and the CS Mutahi Kagwe was a newly appointed cabinet secretary. He just come on board, and PS Susan Mochache was also in the ministry. And so there were several issues and several things that had to be done immediately. You recall that, for instance, Bagadi Hospital had to be equipped but on the order of the president so that we could have a place for isolation of the new COVID-19 cases, people testing positive. We had to put about 120 beds there. There had to be ventilators, there had to be PPEs and all those other things. And these were new things that are not in the everyday balance of Kemsa, for instance.
But before we get into the procurement, in as far as those two officers are concerned, you have no knowledge of the same. Your CEO never at one point confided in you, presumably, that he was under any duress.
No, he didn't.
All right. He also claimed that there was a certain brigadier who was equally putting pressure on Kemsa to do things a certain way. Are you aware of who that is?
I'm not aware of that.
The first you heard of it was at the Senate?
Well, he mentioned it at the Senate. It was also mentioned at the National Assembly the previous day, when you had the Committee of Health questioning us as a board of directors and also the management on issues to do with COVID-19.
Right.
And certain issues came up, and in the National Assembly, as much as in the Senate, there were allegations that we were under pressure from the minister, from the PS. And I made it clear that that was not the position.
All right. What was their involvement, if any, at all in tendering? Was there any?
You see, a lot of the things that we bought, and I did say at the Senate and also in the National Assembly that we received a total of 2.1 billion shillings from the Ministry of Health. And obviously, they were asking us to procure certain things on behalf of the Ministry of Health so that they could be distributed to the needy places, to the counties, to rural health facilities and to other places. So it is not possible to remove the Ministry of Health from this, because the money that was given by the World Bank, for instance, came to us through the Ministry of Health, and we were instructed to make certain procurements on behalf of the ministry and then distribute them as the ministry directed. So the ministry, yes, was involved in the procurement because it's our mother ministry first and foremost, and we cannot quite operate outside our ministry. And this COVID issue was an emergency, and the ministry, both the CS and the whole Ministry of Health, had to do several things to mitigate the issue of the newfound pandemic in our country.
But in as far as their specific involvement of the ministry, to where did it stop in as far as procurement was concerned? Was it simply to say the things that they wanted and where they wanted them distributed, or did they go down to the detail of who to purchase from?
First of all, I think it's important to understand what Kemsa does, because this is something that is getting whitewashed in the whole of all these issues. When these issues are politicized and there's so much talk, people forget that Kemsa has a mandate under the Kemsa Act 2013, amended in 2019, to procure, warehouse, and distribute. Now, we do not procure on our own behalf. We procure on behalf of the government, the Ministry of Health, for instance. We procure on behalf of Global Fund, and we procure on behalf of the USAID. We procure on behalf of all these people, and then invariably we get instructions on how to distribute. First of all, we warehouse for them, and they give us a fee or pay us a fee for that service. And then invariably they instruct us on how to distribute the things that we have procured on their behalf.
My question is specifically, did they give you instruction on who to purchase from? Not what to purchase where to take it?
There is a letter that has been doing the rounds on 758 million shillings. And that was 758 million shillings was the money that had come from the World Bank. And to that letter is attached a list of the things that were to be purchased and from whom. But I want to make it clear
So
here.
it is an authentic letter?
It's an authentic letter, but I want to make it here clear and now that list, the list that is doing the rounds, just because it was attached to the letter from the Permanent Secretary, Susan Mochache, that list had actually emanated from Kemsa. Because we are the ones who do procurement. And we are the ones who have been asked by the ministry to procure those several items from several people. But because when COVID came in April, we started getting a lot of people showing interest to sell to us PPEs, face masks, testing kits, and even ventilators and so many other things. The ministry did not know who these people are. So in discussions with the ministry and our CA and our CEO, the suspended CEO now, they had prepared that list. It is that list that then was used by the ministry to set out the people who had the capacity pursuant to the letters of commitments that we had received and the show of interest. So that letter came, although it came attached to a letter from the Permanent Secretary, that list had actually emanated from Kemsa.
All right, and we'll discuss that in a little detail, but first I just want to get an understanding of the procurement process, and so let's deal with that. What specific tendering process was used to procure items for COVID-19? Was it hybrid, or was it just direct procurement? How did you go about it?
Okay. The other thing I want to tell you before I come to that is that we do two types of procurement. I told you we do procurements on behalf of the ministry. We do procurements on behalf of the Global Fund and USAID. We also do procurements using Kemsa capital. That is our own money, our own revolving fund, because one of our mandates is to procure and then sell to the counties. You must remember that Kemsa has the monopoly or has the mandate to procure and then sell and distribute these health products and technologies to the counties. So,
in respect of COVID-19 now.
I know you're asking about COVID-19, but I think you need to have a background on how these things are done. When COVID came, and His Excellency the President declared it a pandemic, when the first case was discovered on about 13th or 15th of March this year, it was declared to be an emergency. And the procurement rules or laws on emergencies are different from the normal procurement laws. In an emergency, you are allowed under the Act to procure without going through the normal tender. And we sought the advice from the Solicitor General,
right,
and we had the advice generally from the PPRA, the Procurement Authority. So all these things were in black and white on how to do the procurement
and you have letters
for emergency.
To the same effect.
We have letters to that effect, yes. Yeah, and we followed that to the letter.
Right. So in that scenario then, who was directly involved in that procurement process? Did you, for instance, have to still set up a tendering committee or not?
We have a director of procurement. We have a CEO first and foremost. We have a director of procurement, and we also have a commercial director. We have 7 directorates at Kemsa, over and above the board of directors. And their work is set out because the main mandate of Kemsa is to procure and warehouse. So those are the two things. So procurement is our speciality at Kemsa, because that's what we do from every day.
So there was no committee, it was just dealt with the specific officer?
It was dealt with by the Directorate of Procurement and the Commercial Services Director and the CEO's office. That is how they did it, so that they were able to get commitments for what was required, whether it was from the ministry
Okay.
or on behalf of the ministry.
To what extent was the board involved in that?
The board would not be involved in procurement.
Not at all.
Not at all, because that is day-to-day management. Board gives general directions on how things are done. The board agrees and agrees a budget at the commencement of the financial year, and then the board also confirms what we call a procurement plan. And we had a procurement plan for the year 2019-2020, and that is there in black and white. We had a budget for the year 2019-2020, that again is there in black and white. But of course, you must note and remember that that procurement plan did not have COVID in it, because we had our own plan up to June, end of June 2020. COVID came in mid-March of 2020. It was not something that had been factored into the budget for that year. It came in as an emergency, but obviously Kemsa was expected to have COVID-19 related commodities to ameliorate or to mitigate the pandemic in the country.
Senator Ledamo Lekina challenged and said that there are emails that clearly showed you directing, for instance, the signing of a contract at a specific or by a specific time, and that is proof that the board was directly involved in how these tenders.
This has nothing to do with COVID-19. I think you need to understand that also. Kemsa is an entity, and COVID-19 came and found us doing what we do from day to day. So there are COVID-19 related issues, and there are day-to-day procurements that go on at Kemsa.
So none of that instruction dealt with COVID?
Would have to deal with the distinction between those two things. Because even today, even as we are still warehousing COVID-19 related commodities, we are still continuing with our normal day-to-day business of procuring, warehousing and distributing health products and technologies.
Right. Yeah. And as things stand now, the agency has this stock of PPE and supplies worth, I think, is it 6.2 billion shillings, having already overshot its budget.
That's right.
How do you intend to deal with it?
I think also, before we come to how we intend to deal with it, because I think that's a very important question that you have now raised, it's also important to want to know why we are having stocks worth 6.2 billion shillings and why it is not moving at the moment. I would like the whole world, indeed all the Kenyan citizens, to know that the procurements for COVID-19 commodities at Kemsa were done between the months of March, April and May. We have not procured in June, except those instances where there was an extension for delivery of any item. And the other thing I think that people need to be told candidly without any shortcuts about it is that COVID-19 related items were costing what they were costing in March, April and May. And that is not what they are costing today. The mask that you are wearing today, for instance, if it was N95, you could most likely have bought it for between 700 and 900 shillings in March. Today, you could buy it maybe for 500 shillings, for 450 shillings. But the reports that keep coming in seem to show, not to realize that there were those stages between March, April, May, and June up to August, that prices have fluctuated and changed. But every time, like when I was before the Senate and then before the National Assembly the day before, even when we told them that we bought at 900 shillings then, and that was the average cost of that item at that moment, they still continue to report that those things were costing 450 shillings at that time. They forget, unless they are doing a direct misleading of the people, that the cost today may be 450, maybe even 300 shillings, but it was 900, in some instances 1,200, and depending on the timing and what exactly that was being bought. And then I want to remind people also that it was around this same period when we were buying a 3-ply mask for 50 shillings each, therefore 5,000 shillings for a carton of so many. That is what it was costing then. Today if you went to a supermarket, to a chemist, that's how much you bought it at then. So
because you're talking of masks, let me give you the example.
Let me just finish.
Hold on, sir, because we're running out of time, but just on the same issue of masks, an example that is often quoted, for instance, in the letter that we talked about from the PS, for instance, You had Mission for Essential Drugs, which was charging 250 for one mask, allocated 1,000 face masks, while Megascope was bidding for 900 a piece, allocated 10,000 pieces. Just from that, there were suppliers who had some fairly cheap prices.
But if you look at that letter and do a critic of that letter, you find that Meds, which was selling at 250 shillings, had only 1,000 units. If you look at that, if you have that letter with you, I don't know whether or not you have it. I don't have it here with me. But they had only 1,000 units. And that was not sufficient because the ministry was clear that it required so many. Now, obviously, we bought from Meds. Maybe they had old stocks, maybe. And you can see that they're the only ones who are selling at 200. The others were selling between 700 and 900 shillings. Right? So maybe Meds had that small stock of 1,000 units of those masks, N95, but the others were importing them at the prices that were being imported at that time. And you notice that we have not bought any more masks from Meds, but we have continued to buy from the other suppliers at the price that I'm telling you. So there is no mistake at all. There is no double pricing that people are talking about. It is quite clear, and I hope you have that letter, because if you have it, then you ask yourself, why is Meds supplying us, quoting for us for only 1,000 units? What I suspect happened at that moment is that was the stock they had, and it was old stock, because ordinarily K95 masks or N95 masks are not used on the streets. These are for doctors, these are used for tuberculosis.
But you don't know that for certainty.
I'm telling you what I believe. And then exactly the point you are making, those are allegations. I am in a position to tell you. And you tell me what you believe, not what you know as fact. I can also tell you what I know as fact, and I'm challenging.
So do you know it as a fact that was only the number of units that they had? Is that what you're saying?
It must be, because there's the only ones they offer to sell us.
It must be, it's not a fact.
It must be, because if they had more than that, and somebody was buying them, and Meds is in the business of selling commodities just like Kemsa, they would have sold to us everything they had at that moment.
All right, let me take some quick questions from Twitter. Maina Kabiri is asking, Ambassador, exactly how much financing for COVID-19 has Kemsa received, and how much has been lost through corruption?
Oh, I don't know about corruption myself, but I said at the beginning that the amount of money we have, the money we have received from the Ministry of Health on COVID-related items is 2.1 billion shillings, and that we have not even utilized the whole amount of that, the whole of that amount of money. It is work in progress. We are continuing to procure on behalf of the Ministry of Health, and this are stratified. Yeah, okay. I mentioned to the 758 million shillings, out of which we have used 304 million shillings already supplied and been paid by the ministry, and another 148 million shillings which we have billed the ministry.
Okay. Another one is asking Samuel Wanjeri on Facebook, why did he not know that money was being stolen? Related to that, also on Facebook, Owino Daniel, is he in a position to assist recover all the stolen money in an organization he was overseeing? So let me condense it as such. Is it, to the best of your knowledge, are you saying that no money was misappropriated or was stolen in this Kemsa process, or do you believe that there is something questionable?
You know, the reason we have the several arms, the reason EACC is conducting an investigation at Kemsa is, first of all, to verify whether there was double pricing, which people are claiming there was, which I don't believe there was, is to verify whether there were kickbacks, is to verify whether there was corruption. And that is why also the Office of the Auditor General has been at Kemsa for the last 1 month or so. And they are doing their own audit and they are doing their own investigations, partly on the request of the Public Accounts Committee of the National Assembly, partly on the request of the Health Committee of the National Assembly, so that those questions that are being asked about corruption can be answered. It is not enough for anybody to say, you cannot tell me as a chairman of Kemsa that I should have seen corruption happening. I'm not a procurement officer. I chair the board, and the board has its own committees. And I told you that the chairman of the board or the board itself are not involved in the day-to-day issues of management. Otherwise, the board could then as well go and sit at the offices there and run the show. But we cannot. If you look at the act or any act of law establishing a board, Our work is to give direction to the management on how to go about the business.
Okay, let me take another question. Gitonga Mugo, you say, how much is he, in brackets, personal worth after ascending to the chairpersonship of the Kemsa board? And you continue, P.S. I don't expect a truthful answer, neither do I imagine he will take the time to answer this. But, I mean, the question goes to the heart of the allegations that you yourself were the recipient of a bribe to the tune of 45 million shillings. Is that the case?
From who?
From one of the suppliers.
I have never received a bribe, whether at Kemsa or elsewhere, to influence anything. And I want, if I have received, if anybody claims I've received 45 million shillings or even 10 million shillings, whatever number of money, my advice to them would be very simple: to go to Karura and report to the DCI or report to the EACC so that can be investigated. You know, when you talk about...
Are you willing to open up your accounts
it's not a question,
to public scrutiny?
It's not a question of willing. That is the law. That is why we have EACC. That is why they have the mandate to come and tell me, Kembi Gitura, we want to see your accounts and we want to see how you have operated them from this point to the next point. If they want me to give them a list of what I have and what I don't have, again, it's not something I can tell them I won't, because that is the law. And I'm quite willing to answer your question for them to take that position or take that step.
All right. What due diligence was done on the companies that were awarded the tenders?
I expect so. I expect that that is part of the people who do the procurement. But again,
to your knowledge?
Again, the board doesn't do procurement. This is the thing that people need to understand, that the board does not do procurement. The reason we have a procurement director, the reason we have an internal auditor, the reason then we have the Office of the Auditor General is so that those questions can be answered, so that instead of people making allegations of corruption, instead of people making allegations of double pricing or what have you, it is possible for the Auditor General to come out and give out clearly what the situation is regarding procurement.
But even in this emergency scenario where you were having to do direct procurement, you were not curious as the board to ensure that still, you know, due process was being followed?
Why should I be? We have a budget. We have given them a budget. It was obvious that it was possible for the budget to be surpassed because, like I say, COVID came within, when there were only 3 months left to the end of the financial year. And therefore, you would expect that we had spent most of the budget as of that time, the budget that we had for 4.6 billion shillings. But then COVID came. It would have been irresponsible for us as an authority, which is mandated to deal with this kind of situations. It would have been extremely irresponsible for us not to procure COVID-19 related items so that we have them, so that if they are required in the counties, that we are able to deliver them or distribute them to the counties.
But you don't know if any pre-qualification procedure was followed?
It must have been followed. Like, I mean, the normal procurement procedures and laws were followed. That is why I keep saying there is. You know,
there's something with your answers. You're saying it must have been. I'm sure it was. Is it? Are you saying that with certainty from a point of knowledge, or your hope as a chairman that?
I'm saying it with certainty because it's common knowledge that you cannot do procurement otherwise than using the laid down standard. And I'm telling you that in an emergency like the one we have now of COVID, because COVID is still with us, we took advice from the Solicitor General, who is the advisor to the government and to public entities. And we have it in black and white. And that was followed. Was due diligence, was there prudence in buying so many items like the one that we are holding 6.2 billion shillings? That's a question for another, that's a different question altogether. And it does not mean that there was corruption or that there was double pricing just because we have stock worth 6.2 billion shillings in our warehouses. The stock is there. What
does it mean then? What does it mean if you overshot your budget?
It means, and that's why I say it's a question of prudence, and that is what has to be determined. It means that somebody who owns a business in Nairobi bought so many stocks of, say for instance, beer, because he knew it was going to be, August is a good beer selling month. And he had several crates of beer, and he stocked it in his warehouse. And then with nothing to do with him or her. COVID came, curfew was declared, bars were closed, eateries were closed, you have your beer, it is nearing expiry day, and you still have stocks there. It's not a question of corruption, it's not a question of imprudence, it's a question of a market shifting when you are having commodities with you that are not moving as fast as they need to. Because
what specific stocks are in excess?
Let me say this, because you must know this. You must know this, that even as we had imported through our suppliers the COVID-related items like masks and PPEs, etc., the ministry, through the effort of Cabinet Secretary Mutahi Kagwe and his team, they started having PPEs manufactured here. And whereas we were buying PPEs for 9,000 shillings, PPE prices came to 4,500 shillings. The masks that people are wearing, which were going for 5,000 shillings, we started making them here. As I'm sitting here, we are working with the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We have 300 million shillings from the ministry that we are holding, which is going to be used to enable the smaller manufacturers through Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry to manufacture reusable masks. Now, this is going to bring it down even further. So if we had bought a mask...
So you're saying it was a question of...
So if we had bought a mask...
So let me return to my earlier question.
But let me finish this.
What then will you do with these excess stocks? How do you intend to dispose of it?
God forbid, all of us want COVID to end. We pray every day that COVID should end. But COVID is still here. And the masks that we have, the PPEs we have, are still good quality masks. Yeah? We may not be able to offload them at the price that we bought them for of 6.2 billion shillings. And we have asked for the authority of the Cabinet Secretary, because we have to ask for his authority due to the procurement laws to allow us to offload them at the current prices. The government can do many things, because it can also give us a distribution list, because there are still places where there are no PPEs at the moment. There are still places where there are no face masks and so many other things, and sanitizers. If the government instructs us to distribute them, like the government does from time to time, then we'll distribute those items. They'll serve the purpose for which we bought them. We'll lose some money, but nobody is going to suffer. We are going to make the payments to our suppliers, and we are going to have the float or the cash flow that we need at Kemsa. But the items we are holding are there. They are intact. When I was in Senate, when I was in the National Assembly, I told them that the doors to all our warehouses are open. In Mombasa, Kisumu, here in Embakasi, and in Commercial Street, and everywhere else, so that they can verify for themselves that everything is intact and can be distributed or sold at market price, the current market price, so that we do not continue to lose money.
Because we're out of time, just a final question. The President this past week moved PS Mochache, appointing her PS Medical Services. That was later withdrawn. What do you make of that move?
I would not even think about it. That's a presidential prerogative to move PSs and CSs as he finds fit. To create more efficiency.
But it certainly happened at a curious time when she is the subject of controversy that equally affects the authority which you chair.
Like I say, even tomorrow the president can move the CS and bring in another CS. That is his prerogative, that is his mandate.
All right, we're out of time. We'll see how it plays out. Kemsa is due back before the Senate, and we'll be following and reporting here on Punchline. That's our time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much indeed.